Hi, Dr. P here, and I'm going to talk briefly about what makes a game a war game, because not all games that are supposedly about a war are what I would call a war game from a historical point of view anyway. For example, the war on drugs is not a war game. A war on terror is not a war game. Even a gang war frequently is not a war game, although it's getting a lot closer. Why is that? Well, I've tried to define that, and I've come up with 4 factors, all of which are required to make a game a war game. First of all, there has to be a possibility of failure. Now, I wouldn't have said that 50 years ago, but we now have many games where the player cannot fail or the players cannot fail. And if there's no possibility of failure, you don't have a game. It might be that you're doing something that's supposed to be war, but you don't have a game anymore. You've got something else. At least that's my point of view. I think of games as opposed games, and if the opposition cannot win, if you cannot lose, then you don't have an opposed game. The other 3 are perhaps more conventional. The first is it has to be lethal conflict. Lethal, in other words, people die. Because there are games where people don't die, or representations of people don't die. Usually, but not always, that lethal conflict is going to be between independent states or political entities. Now, the second thing is there needs to be maneuver or placement. Maneuver or placement. So if you think about many old classical games like chess and checkers, even tic-tac-toe, and certainly Go, which is a placement game, yes, it's important where you put things. And that's why you need a board. Even if it's a video game, there's a board inside the programming. Because that board enables you to see the maneuvering or see the placement. There are a great many so-called board games that are not really board games in my estimation. They're just using a board as a status tracker. And you can track that status a whole lot of other ways. For example, Munchkin Deluxe has a board. What does the board do? It keeps track of the levels of the players. Well, for many versions of Munchkin before that, there was another method to use to keep track of the levels of the players. The board has just been added to make for a greater cost. Number 3 is geospatial relationships. In other words, it's important where things are, which again is why you need a board. If it's not important where things are, then it's pretty difficult to have maneuver, if you think about it. And I say geospatial rather than spatial because generally in war it involves real terrain and a map of some sort. So we have 4 things to go over again: the possibility of failure, lethal conflict, usually between independent entities, political entities, maneuver or placement, and geospatial relationships. And I've seen lots of so-called war games that lack some of those, and to me, they're not war games. Now, your mileage may vary. You may have a different view. I'm trying to narrow down a definition. If we do go to a very broad definition, then you can call almost anything a war game, just as you can call almost anything a game. But that's not useful for discussion. So I'm going to stick with what I've got. Thanks for listening.